Let me tell you something that goes against everything you've been taught to believe about getting older. Most people think that after 40, life starts to close in, that opportunities shrink, that energy fades, that the best is already behind you. That aging is losing. That is a lie, and the Stoics knew it 2,000 years ago. What nobody tells you is this: after 40, you finally have what younger people don't, enough clarity to stop wasting. Enough life lived to know what actually matters. And if you use that clarity the right way, the next years can be the most powerful of your life. But here's the problem. Most people who reach 40 don't use that clarity. They keep carrying habits, relationships, beliefs, and patterns that should have been left behind much earlier. They keep doing things that wisdom, if it had been listened to, would have eliminated years ago. And you're probably doing some of those things right now. Not out of weakness, out of habit, out of never stopping to ask, does this still make sense for who I want to be? This video is about 7 of those things. 7 behaviors that truly wise people, not perfectly but progressively, stop doing after 40. Not because they became cold or distant, but because they learned, as the Stoics taught, that life is too short to be wasted on what doesn't build. Subscribe to the channel. Here we don't sell motivation, we deliver real clarity. With philosophical depth you can actually use tomorrow. Let's begin. Thingwestig. Stop explaining every decision to people who didn't ask. Have you noticed that the older you get, the less patience you have for justifying yourself? That's not rudeness, that's wisdom arriving. Here's what almost no one notices. The need to explain every choice you make to others isn't communication. It's insecurity disguised as transparency. You explain because you still need approval. Because you still believe, somewhere deep down, that your decision is only valid if someone confirms it's right. Most people spend their 20s and 30s in this exhausting cycle, justifying their career to family, explaining their relationship to friends, defending their financial choices to people who never paid a single bill of theirs, and then they arrive at 40 still doing the same thing, only more tired. The Stoics had a name for this trap. They called it living for the theater, acting as if there were a permanent audience evaluating your every move. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that cuts straight through. Receive without pride, release without struggle. In other words, don't become so attached to your own decisions that you need to defend every one of them to the world. A decision made from your own values doesn't need a lawyer. Let me tell you about a woman named Helena. Helena was 43 years old when she decided to close her own psychology practice, which was successful, respected, exactly what she had planned for years, to work as an independent consultant on social projects. She earned half of what she had before and was immeasurably more satisfied. The problem wasn't the decision, it was what came after it. Months of explaining to colleagues that it wasn't a crisis. Endless conversations with family trying to justify that she wasn't being irresponsible. Carefully written replies to acquaintances who hadn't asked for any explanation at all. She told me, "I spent more energy explaining the decision than living it." One day, an older friend, 58 years old, someone Helena admired, said something simple that stayed with her. "Helena, you don't owe your life to anyone. Stop presenting a defense where nobody made an accusation." After that, when someone asked about the change, she answered with one sentence and moved on. Not with arrogance, with the calm of someone who doesn't need a verdict from others to know they made the right choice. The objection that will come up is, but what about when the people who matter need to understand? The people who truly matter, the ones you love and who love you, don't need a detailed report on every choice. They need your presence, your honesty, and your peace. When you stop spending energy explaining to everyone, there's far more left for being genuinely present with those who deserve it. Epictetus said, if someone offends you, remember it was their judgment, not the facts, that offended you. Invert that. If someone questions your choices, remember it's their insecurity, not the fragility of your decisions, that's speaking. The habit is simple and powerful. Before entering justification mode, ask, Did this person ask? And if they did, will my answer actually change anything, or do they just want to validate their own opinion? If the answer is no, one sentence and move forward. My choices don't need approval. They need consistency. Thing 2 stop maintaining relationships out of guilt, not choice. How many relationships in your life today do you maintain by genuine choice? And how many do you maintain because you'd feel guilty if you didn't? Be honest. It's one of the most revealing questions there is. Here's an uncomfortable truth that most people never hear. Maintaining a relationship out of guilt isn't loyalty. It's a sophisticated form of emotional cowardice. You stay present not because you want to, but because you're afraid of what you'll feel if you leave, or what the other person will think if you establish distance. And meanwhile, the relationship nourishes nobody. It exists as obligation on both sides, even if only one side realizes it. Most people were raised with the idea that loyalty means permanence, that being good means always being available, that caring about someone means never pulling back, never setting limits, never saying, "This doesn't work for me anymore." After 40, that belief starts collecting a price that becomes hard to ignore. The Stoics understood the distinction with surgical precision. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make you better, not with those who have known you the longest, not with those who would make you feel guilty if you stepped back, with those who make you better." Let me tell you about a man named Marcello. Marcello was 46 years old and had a group of college friends who had been meeting every month for over 2 decades. 20-something years of history, photos on the walls, an active group chat. And every time Marcello left those gatherings, he came home with that specific feeling of productive emptiness. He had been with people, had laughed, had talked, and still felt lonelier than before he went. The conversations never grew. They circled around the same jokes, the same stories from 20 years ago, the same complaints about work and politics. Any attempt to go deeper was deflected with humor. He stayed for 2 more years, not because he was thriving, because he felt he should. When he finally started going less frequently, without drama, without elaborate explanation, something curious happened. 2 of the 6 friends from the group reached out individually. Those 2, outside the context of the group, had completely different conversations. More honest, more deep, more real. The other 4 gradually disappeared. And Marcello realized that the group of 6 was, in reality, 2 real friends and 4 relationships maintained out of habit and guilt. It's not about cutting anyone off. It's about stopping the pretense that quantity is quality. The habit is an honest review once a year. Look at the regular relationships in your life and ask, if guilt and habit didn't exist, would I choose to keep investing in this? The ones that answer yes deserve more than you've been giving them. The ones that answer no deserve honesty, yours and theirs. I choose who walks with me. I don't carry those who didn't choose me too. Thing 3 stop postponing your health as if your body will wait. Here's something that's going to be uncomfortable and needs to be uncomfortable. You probably already know what needs to change about your health. It's not a lack of information. It's chronic postponement disguised as planning. I'll start Monday, when life settles down, after this project is done. And Monday becomes a month. The month becomes a year. And the body, which doesn't make a habit of waiting for convenience, keeps sending signals that get louder with each ignored cycle. What nobody tells you about health after 40 is this. The body stops being patient in the same way. In your 20s, you could sleep poorly for weeks and recover in a weekend. Eat badly for months and reverse it in a few weeks of attention. Stay sedentary for a year and get back in shape in a few months. After 40, the equation changes. Recovery is slower, the cost of neglect is higher, and the time you have to build the physical foundation that will sustain you for the next 30, 40 years is now, not later. The Stoics weren't obsessed with aesthetics, but they understood that the body is the instrument through which you live everything else. Musonius Rufus, a lesser-known but equally profound Stoic philosopher, taught that the body needs to be strengthened not for appearance, but for endurance, to withstand the demands of life with dignity. Marcus Aurelius, who had poor health for much of his life, wrote about this with an honesty that cuts through. He understood that while he couldn't control the body completely, controlling what he did with it, what he ate, how he slept, how he moved, was one of the few real ways to exercise power over his own existence. Let me tell you about a woman named Claudia. Claudia was 44 years old, worked 10 hours a day, slept an average of 5 hours, ate when she could, and had stopped exercising almost 3 years earlier. She knew all of this. She talked about it. She had plans to change. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic. It was a routine exam that revealed high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, and a chronic fatigue that her doctor described as your body asking for help in a loud voice. She told me, "The doctor didn't scare me. He gave me a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw, not physically, but how much I had abandoned myself while taking care of everything and everyone else." What Claudia did wasn't radical. She slept 7 hours, walked 30 minutes a day, stopped skipping meals. 3 months later, her tests had improved significantly, and more importantly, she had recovered something she didn't know she had lost: the feeling of being present in her own body. The objection is predictable. I don't have time. And the honest answer is, do you have time to get sick? Because that's what postponement guarantees, not the absence of health problems, but their delay to a point where the cost is higher and the options are fewer. Seneca wrote, "Set aside everything that occupies your mind and ask yourself the right questions." The right question about health after 40 isn't, when am I going to start? It's, what am I building now that will sustain me 20 years from now? My body is not an obstacle. It is the instrument of everything I want to live. Thing fordige. Stop letting resentment occupy space. That could be peace. There's something that wise people after 40 come to realize that most people still haven't. Carrying resentment doesn't hurt the person who hurt you. It hurts you. Every day. In silence. With interest. Here's the truth: nobody wants to hear about resentment. It isn't a reaction to the past. It's a choice you renew every time you revisit that memory, that situation, that person. Every time the anger rises again, you're choosing to pay again for what was already charged once. Most people treat resentment as something that simply exists, like a weather condition, something that appears and that you just endure. It isn't. It's a mental habit. And like every habit, it can be changed. Seneca wrote something that is one of the most precise sentences on the subject. Anger is an acid that does more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. The vessel is you. The thing it's poured on may not even be in your life anymore. After 40, the cost of resentment becomes impossible to ignore. You look at the time that has passed and realize how many years of energy went toward people and situations that are already over. How many decisions were made from hurt instead of clarity? How many new relationships were damaged by the weight of old wounds? Let me tell you about a man named Paulo. Paulo was 48 years old and carried a hurt with his father that he had been holding for over 2 decades. His father had chosen work over family throughout Paulo's entire childhood, absent at recitals, at competitions, during illnesses. Present in financial support, absent in presence. Paulo had never spoken about it directly, but the hurt showed up in everything. In the way he treated authority at work, in his difficulty trusting people close to him, in the physical tension he felt every time his father's name came up in conversation. His father was 74, Paulo realized, in a rare moment of quiet, that he had been waiting, without admitting it to himself, for his father to apologize before he died, and that this waiting was defining how he lived the present. What changed wasn't a dramatic conversation. It was an internal decision made in silence. I refuse to give the next years to the weight of the years that are already gone. Not because what happened was right, but because I cannot change what was, and I can choose who I am now. Paulo didn't become best friends with his father, but he stopped carrying the hurt as an identity. And in the space that opened up, he found something he hadn't expected: energy. Creative, relational, professional. Energy that had been damned for years behind a wall of resentment. Here's the most common objection: but letting go means forgiving. And I'm not ready to forgive. Letting go isn't forgiving in the sense of absolving. It's stopping the payment of a price for something that already happened. It's recognizing that the past has already cost enough, and that the present doesn't need to keep paying for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, not to react, not to carry it, not to let what was done define who you become. I release what has already been. My energy belongs to what can still be." Thing 5 Bowdigs. Stop chasing validation in spaces that build nothing. Here's something that's going to sound all too familiar. You post something, an achievement, a reflection, a photo, and in the minutes that follow, you keep checking. How many likes? Who commented? Whether someone important saw it, whether the number is growing or stalling. And if it grew, you feel good for a few hours. If it didn't, you wonder what you did wrong. This isn't shallow vanity. It's something deeper and more dangerous. It's the outsourcing of your self-worth to an algorithm. Most people who reach 40 with this pattern installed don't realize how much mental energy goes into this cycle. Not just the minutes on screen, but the thoughts between checks. The comparison with whoever seems to be getting more attention. The narrative you build about your value based on numbers that change by the hour. What nobody tells you about digital validation is this: it's never enough. By design. Platforms were built to create exactly this cycle of incomplete satisfaction. You receive enough to want more, never enough to feel complete. The Stoics didn't have social media, but they had something equivalent. Politics, public applause, the fame of the empire. And Marcus Aurelius wrote about it with a clarity that travels 2,000 years. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. After 40, continuing to seek validation in the wrong places is especially costly because you already have enough experience to know it doesn't work, and yet you continue. Which means it's not naivety, it's habit. And habits are broken with awareness and decision, not with isolated willpower. Let me tell you about a woman named Renata. Renata was 41 years old, an architect, and had built over the years a professional profile on social media that she herself described as my showcase. Projects photographed, processes documented, achievements shared. The problem was that she had reached a point where the decision of whether or not to accept a project was influenced, sometimes determined by the project's potential to generate good content for the profile. Not by what the project meant to her or to the client, by what it would generate in attention. The moment of clarity came when she turned down a small but genuinely meaningful project, renovating the home of a retired teacher on a limited budget because it wouldn't look good on the feed, and accepted a larger, more visually striking project for a client she had no affinity with whatsoever. She told me, "I realized I was building a life that photographed well. Not a life I actually wanted to live." What Renata did wasn't leave social media. It was change the relationship. She stopped checking metrics daily, started posting when she had something genuine to say, not when the algorithm demanded it, and accepted projects based on her own criteria, not those of an audience. She had never deliberately chosen Epictetus, taught that external approval is a form of slavery, because your peace comes to depend on something you don't control. And the antidote isn't total indifference. It's building an internal source of validation so solid that the external becomes a bonus, not a necessity. The practical habit: once a week, ask about each space where you seek validation. What am I building here? If the answer is nothing that lasts, you don't need to abandon the space. But you need to stop expecting from it what it cannot give. My value is not measured by approval. It is built by consistency. Thing 6 degraan. Stop living in urgency mode as if everything is equally important. You know that feeling of arriving at the end of the day completely exhausted. And when you try to list what you did that actually mattered, the list is surprisingly short. That's not a lack of discipline. That's the cost of chronic urgency mode. Here's what almost no one notices about life after 40. The urgency you feel in most situations isn't real. It's learned. It's a pattern installed by years of responding to everything as if it were an emergency. Emails answered in minutes, messages attended to immediately, other people's problems absorbed, as if they were your own, and the result is that your attention, the most precious resource you have, is permanently fragmented between what shouts loudest and what actually matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote one of the most useful distinctions in Stoic philosophy: the difference between what seems urgent and what is truly important. He governed an empire. There were real emergencies every day, and yet he wrote about the need to protect his time and attention from the manufactured urgencies of the collective anxiety around him. After 40, this distinction becomes more necessary and more possible, because you have enough experience to know that most of the crises that seemed urgent, life resolved on its own, and that the things that truly shaped who you are were rarely urgent. They were consistent. Let me tell you about a man named Fernando. Fernando was 47 years old and was a manager at a mid-sized company. He was the kind of person everyone called when there was a problem, not because he was the only one capable, but because he responded faster than anyone. He was reliable in the most exhausting sense of the word. In a routine medical appointment, his doctor asked how he was sleeping. Fernando replied that he averaged 5 hours and woke at 3 in the morning worried about work-pending items. His doctor said something that Fernando repeated to me verbatim: "You're treating your mind like a 24-hour on-call service. It will charge you for that." What Fernando changed wasn't the amount of work. It was his relationship with it. He began classifying every incoming demand into 3 categories. Needs me now, can wait until tomorrow, or can be handled by someone else. Category 1 was smaller than he imagined, much smaller. In 3 months, he was sleeping better. In 6, he had delegated enough to work the same hours with a third of the mental fragmentation. And he realized that the urgency he felt wasn't coming from the situations. It was coming from him. It was an internal pattern he had confused with responsibility. Seneca wrote, "Busy yourself with fewer things if you want to have a tranquil mind." That's not laziness, it's precision. Doing less with more presence is always superior to doing more with fragmented attention. The practice is a question you ask before reacting to any demand. Does this need me now, or does it just feel urgent because I'm on autopilot? In most cases, the answer changes what you do next. I protect my attention. It goes where it truly matters. Thing 7 degraan. Stop postponing the version of yourself you want to be. This is the most important one, and the hardest to hear. There is a version of you that you've been carrying in your mind for years. Calmer, more present, braver in the choices that matter, and lighter in the ones that don't. More faithful to your own values. More whole. You know who that person is. And you also know that you're not completely them yet. Here's what almost no one has the courage to say. After 40, the postponement of that version starts to go by a different name. It's no longer called "the timing isn't right yet." It's called surrender, not the dramatic, conscious kind. The quiet kind. The kind that happens one day at a time while you keep waiting for conditions to improve, for life to get easier, for fear to diminish before you act. Marcus Aurelius wrote something to himself on one of those nights before battle that is the most honest text I know on this subject. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think, not as morbidity, as urgency for life. 2,000 years of Stoic philosophy converge on a single point about this. You won't find the best version of yourself by waiting for the right conditions. You build it by doing today, with what you have, what the best version of you would do. Let me tell you about a woman named Marta. Marta was 52 years old when she came to me. She had spent the last 12 years, since she was 40, with a project in a drawer. Not a work project, a life project she wanted to write, not necessarily to publish, to exist in a way that the other parts of life didn't allow. 12 years of when the kids grow up, when the marriage stabilizes, when I have more energy, when I feel ready. The kids grew up. The marriage stabilized. The energy didn't magically return. And the readiness, she realized too late, would never arrive before the action. It would come during, or not at all. What she did wasn't radical. She woke up 45 minutes earlier 3 times a week. She wrote, without goals, without pressure, without an audience, just her and the page. 3 months later, she told me something I haven't forgotten. I didn't become a writer, but I stopped being someone who postpones being a writer. And that difference changed how I feel about everything else. The final objection, and the most honest one, is, but what if I start and I'm not good enough? Epictetus answered this fear with precision. It is not things that disturb men, but their judgments about things. The judgment that you need to be good enough before you begin is the judgment that has postponed more lives than any real obstacle ever has. You don't need to be ready. You need to begin. The best version of you isn't waiting in the future. It's being built in the choices you make today. I don't postpone who I want to be. I begin now with what I have, 7 things. 7 choices that truly wise people, not all at once, not without setbacks, but progressively, stop doing after 40. First, stop explaining every decision to people who didn't ask. Your choices don't need a lawyer. Second, stop maintaining relationships out of guilt. Loyalty built on obligation isn't loyalty, it's exhaustion. Third, stop postponing your health. Your body won't wait for convenience, and the cost of postponement grows with every passing year. Fourth, stop feeding resentment. Every time you revisit the hurt, you pay again for what was already charged once. Fifth, stop seeking validation where nothing is built. Your value is built by internal consistency, not external approval. Sixth, stop living in urgency mode. Your attention is the most precious resource you have. Protect it as if your life depends on it, because in many ways, it does. Seventh, stop postponing the version of yourself you want to be. Not when conditions improve. Now, these 7 things aren't a perfection checklist. They are a direction. And the direction begins with a single question that Marcus Aurelius asked himself every night. Today, did I move closer to or further from who I want to be? It doesn't have to be a complete transformation. It has to be one real, honest step taken with what you have today. Before you go, I want to leave you with something more than a reflection. Of the 7 things we talked about today, which one do you know, with certainty, without needing to think too hard, that you're still doing and that should have been left behind long ago? Not the easiest one to let go of. The one you know, if you truly let go of it, would change something important. Write it in the comments. It can be 1 word, 1 sentence. The number of the thing, not for me, for you. Because naming what needs to change is the first real act of change. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself precisely for this reason. Not for posterity, but to make the thought concrete, visible, accountable. Do the same. If this video reached you in a way that made sense, subscribe to the channel. Every week we go deeper, not in beautiful theory, in how you use Stoicism to live in a way that in the end you'll recognize as yours. Leave a like. It helps this content reach the people who need it. And remember, in the words Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself 2,000 years ago, arriving intact to you now. You wake up again tomorrow. What you do with that day is the only question that matters. Until next time.